It is Friday, January 16th, 2026. Usually when we sit down to go through these stacks of reports, we end up talking about market sentiment or political maneuvering, the latest software
Like
release.
abstract stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. But looking at the data from yesterday, I realized we've been ignoring the plumbing. We need to talk about the physical pipes, the wires, the concrete that are suddenly, well, groaning under the weight of the world's ambition.
Hmm.
So before we get into the specifics, and we have a lot, from U.S. energy markets to Ukrainian heating systems,
Well,
I have to ask, if you strip away all the noise, what's the simplest way to summarize the shift we saw yesterday?
if you look for the one thread,
Mhm.
the one thing tying all these disparate reports together, the core vector is this: physical constraints rewriting institutional rules.
Physical constraints rewriting institutional rules,
Oh,
that feels like a real departure from the anything is possible vibe we've had for the last decade or so.
it is. I mean, for the last 20 years, give or take, we've lived in a software era. We believe that with enough code, enough optimization, enough narrative, we could solve any problem. Efficiency was just an algorithm away.
Yeah, that was the thinking.
But yesterday's data suggests that era is, well, it's closing. We're hitting hard physical walls.
And you're not talking about metaphorical walls.
No, I'm talking about electricity generation limits,
Yeah.
actual water scarcity,
Uh-huh.
destroyed infrastructure in conflict zones. These aren't software bugs, they are hardware failures.
Okay.
And because we can't just code our way around a lack of copper or water, we're being forced to rewrite the economic and legal rules of how our society functions.
So we're moving from a phase of like unlimited digital expansion to one of constrained physical redesign.
Precisely. And the first place this is really showing up, and this is our first deep dive, is in the boring but critical world of the U.S. energy grid.
Specifically, the PJM interconnection.
That's the one.
Okay, let's pause on PJM. I feel like we see this acronym in industry reports, but most people don't realize the sheer scale of it.
You're right. PJM isn't just some local utility. It's a regional transmission organization that manages the electric grid for 13 states and the District of Columbia.
13 states.
We are talking about 65 million people. It's larger than the population of the UK. It covers the industrial Midwest, the data-heavy Northern Virginia corridor, all the way to the coast.
It is the engine room of the American economy.
It really is.
So the engine room is having a problem.
The engine room is overheating. For years, we've heard that AI is energy intensive, but it always felt manageable, or at least distant.
The assumption was that the grid had a buffer.
Exactly. But the sheer density of these new AI data centers, we're talking massive clusters of GPUs running 214/7, has finally outstripped that buffer. We aren't just talking about high electric bills, we're talking about genuine reliability issues.
You mean the grid physically can't push enough electrons where they need to go?
Without melting the wires, basically, yes.
So what actually happened yesterday? Because demand is high isn't exactly breaking news.
The breaking news is the institutional response, the rule change. We saw a new proposal surface within the PJM stakeholder process that, well, it effectively shreds the old social contract of the utility sector.
The old social contract.
Yeah. Historically, if a region needed a new power plant or transmission line, the cost was socialized.
Meaning everyone paid for it.
Right. Everyone in the rate base, you, me, the local coffee shop, the factory, we all paid a tiny fraction of a cent more per kilowatt hour to fund it.
Yeah.
We all shared the grid, so we all shared the cost.
Right, that's how utilities work. It's a public good.
Exactly. But this new proposal flips that completely on its head. It suggests a beneficiary pays model, and it's aimed squarely at these hyperscale tech companies.
Okay, so what does that mean in practice?
It means if a tech giant wants to build a gigawatt-scale data center, which is the energy equivalent of dropping a medium-sized city into a cornfield,
Oh, okay.
they can't just sign up for service anymore. The proposal would require them to directly fund the capital construction of the new power plants and transmission lines needed to serve them.
Wait, let me make sure I understand the mechanics here. You're saying if Amazon or Google wants to plug in, they effectively have to build the power plant themselves, or at least write the check for it up front.
Effectively, yes. Or they have to sign such a rigorous, long-term contract that it guarantees the financing for the utility. It treats the grid connection almost like a private driveway rather than a public road.
So why this sudden shift? I mean, is this just utilities being greedy or?
It's not greed, it's survival and fairness. We call this a high global weight shift because it changes the whole hierarchy.
Guess so.
Tech companies are transitioning from being simple customers to being de facto infrastructure bankrollers.
I see.
The utilities are realizing that if they stick to the old model, socializing these massive costing,
Right.
residential rates would just skyrocket.
Right.
I mean, imagine your grandmother's electric bill going up 40%, just so a server farm next door can train a slightly better chatbot. That's a political suicide pill.
Just a defensive move.
Institutional fatigue. The institutions running our power grid are realizing their old rulebook is just incompatible with the physics of AI. They're saying, if you want this massive amount of power, you have to bring your own checkbook.
Which turns AI infrastructure into a fixed cost for the companies profiting from it.
Rather than a shared cost for society.
Yeah, great. That makes a lot of sense. It's the physical constraint, the lack of power forcing a rewrite of who pays for what.
Mm-hmm.
Now, speaking of physical constraints, I want to pivot to our second deep dive. We need to look at Ukraine. We've been covering the conflict for years, but the reports from yesterday about their energy infrastructure, they feel different. The language has shifted from emergency to something more structural.
It has. We are seeing a pretty grim evolution in what we call the city OS, or the operating system of the city.
The city OS.
Yeah. In the West, we talk about smart cities, sensors, optimization, efficiency. In Ukraine, due to these renewed, highly targeted Russian attacks on generation and transmission, we're seeing the city OS revert to a survival mode.
What does that actually look like on the ground in Kiev? I feel like we hear blackouts and we think about a storm knocking out the power for a few hours.
This is fundamentally different. Yesterday's reports indicate that Kiev is entering a degraded mode, a shrinkage operation.
Shrinkage.
Yeah. It's not just lights flickering. We are seeing the cessation of district heating systems. Limited water availability because the pumps don't have power.
So when you lose electricity in a modern city, you don't just lose light.
You lose the ability to move water and heat.
And in January, that is absolutely life-threatening.
It creates massive tension on the safety membrane of society. A city is a life support system, and if you cannot guarantee heat in winter, the city ceases to be viable for human habitation. It's that serious.
So what's the plan? The government must be responding.
They are. The government has now made increasing generation capacity a national goal, but listen to the timeline. Through the end of 2026.
2026, that's a long time. That implies this isn't a temporary fix.
That's the key insight. They aren't trying to patch the grid back to 2021 standards. They are acknowledging that the old grid is gone.
Wow.
They're redesigning a decentralized, hardened grid purely for survival. But here's where it connects back to our first topic.
The hardware.
The hardware. To rebuild a grid, you need transformers, switchgear, copper, specialized steel.
Right.
There is a global shortage of high-voltage transformers right now. So if Ukraine needs to rebuild its grid for survival, and the U.S. needs to expand its grid for AI, they are competing for the exact same manufacturing slots at Siemens, at Hitachi, at GE.
I hadn't connected those dots. So the AI boom in Virginia is technically competing for resources with the survival efforts in Kiev.
It's all one supply chain. The physical reality of the Ukrainian conflict is rippling out and squeezing the supply chain for everyone else. It's a zero-sum game for heavy electrical equipment right now.
That is a very sobering thought. Okay, let's move to our third deep dive. We've talked about the physical grid in the U.S. and the survival grid in Ukraine. Now let's talk about the money. Because building all this stuff, whether it's for chatbots or for heating homes, costs an astronomical amount of money.
It does. And this is where that physical constraints vector smashes into the financial markets. We are watching the financialization of AI infrastructure.
What does that mean exactly, financialization?
Well, look at what happened yesterday in the bond markets. We saw a flood of debt issuance from the major hyperscalers, the big tech AI firms. They're raising billions and billions of dollars through corporate bonds.
But hang on, hasn't big tech always had massive capital expenditures? They build server farms all the time.
Right.
Why is this bond issuance different from what, say, Google or Microsoft did 5 years ago?
That's a great question. 5 years ago, they were largely buying servers assets that depreciated in 3 or 4 years. It was an operational expense.
Okay.
Today, they are funding 30-year infrastructure assets. They are building power plants, transmission lines, massive concrete shells. The duration of the investment has completely changed. They're acknowledging that AI isn't just a software product anymore. It's a heavy industrial utility that needs to be financed like a railroad or an oil pipeline.
So they are locking in debt for the long haul. Why does this matter to the average listener? Someone with a 401k or a small portfolio.
It matters because of capital crowding. The bond market is a finite pool of money, just like the grid is a finite pool of power.
Right.
When these tech giants come in and borrow hundreds of billions of dollars constantly, year after year, to fund this physical build-out, they just suck up the oxygen in the room.
They crowd out other borrowers.
Exactly. If Microsoft is paying a certain rate to borrow billions, that sets a floor. It affects the interest rates and the credit availability for everyone else, for car manufacturers, for home builders, for your local government.
So we're entering a period where AI is a structural fixity in the global economy.
Just the new rent.
The new rent.
It is. The cost of money is becoming tied to the cost of compute infrastructure. So if you're holding index fund, you might think you own tech stocks. But what you actually own is a massive construction project disguised as a software company. The risk profile is changing.
Okay, so to recap our deep dives, the U.S. grid is forcing tech to pay for its own power plants.
Right.
The Ukrainian grid is fighting for survival and competing for the same hardware. And the bond market is being reshaped because the bill for all this physical stuff is finally coming due.
It is a tighter, harder, more expensive world.
Okay, let's zoom out. Those were the big structural shifts. But I want to map the smaller, faster-moving signals. We call this the global membrane tension, what's happening on the edges. I see a lot of notes here on logistics and materials.
Let's look at the map first. We're seeing a clear theme of rewiring logistics, specifically in Central Asia.
You're talking about those railway updates near Almaty.
Yes. There are some quiet railway improvements happening around Almaty in Kazakhstan. On the surface, it just looks like boring maintenance. But the implication is huge.
This is the middle corridor.
Exactly. It's a trade route connecting China to Europe that completely bypasses Russia.
Ah, so it's a geopolitical bypass.
It is. It lowers logistics lead times, and, crucially, it lowers insurance costs because you aren't shipping goods through a war zone. It's the world physically rewiring its trade arteries to avoid the clot of the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Smart. Infrastructure as a hedge. Okay, let's look at materials. I'm seeing lithium in South America and semiconductors. Let's call this supply chain hardening.
That's the right frame. In South America, the U.S. is moving to secure critical minerals like lithium. But notice the mechanism. They're using contract bundles rather than just tariffs.
Contract bundles, what does that mean in practice?
It means instead of just taxing imports from bad actors, they are signing these complex long-term agreements that lock in the supply chain with legal ties and specific refining capabilities. They are trying to lock up the resources for 20 years, not just buy a shipment on the spot market.
It's a race for the periodic table. And how does that connect to the semiconductor note? I see the term ESI here.
The ESI is the Electronic Materials Supply Index. It tracks the flow of raw chemicals and substrates needed to make chips. And the index is flashing red on front end and advanced packaging materials.
Packaging, that sounds like cardboard boxes.
No. In chips, packaging is the incredibly complex process of connecting the silicon die to the circuit board. It needs specialized resins, specialized substrates.
Okay.
And the ESI is telling us that the AI boom is causing shortages in these really unglamorous specific chemicals. It's forcing a reallocation of materials away from other sectors like automotive or consumer electronics to feed the AI beast.
So again, physical limits. We can design the chip, but we might run out of the resin to package it. Okay, final theme for the light topics. Local friction. We saw a fascinating signal out of West Des Moines, USA.
This is one of my favorite signals of the day. City regulators in West Des Moines are demanding zero water cooling for new data centers.
Zero water cooling. So you can build here, but you can't use our water.
Exactly. Data centers are notoriously thirsty. They evaporate millions of gallons of water to stay cool. And West Des Moines is saying, we prioritize our citizens drinking water over your servers.
This is a clear signal of city versus tech.
Absolutely. Local resource constraints are now dictating global technology designs.
And I assume this isn't just an Iowa problem.
Not at all. We are seeing a general signal on water stress globally. Water availability is becoming the primary constraint for thermal and nuclear power. You can't just build a power plant anywhere anymore.
So water is becoming the permit to operate.
If you don't have the water rights, you don't have a project. Simple as that.
It's amazing how it all comes back to the basics, isn't it? Water, electricity, raw materials. We spent so long talking about the metaverse, and it turns out we're stuck arguing over water rights in Iowa.
We often forget that the cloud is actually just a bunch of hot metal boxes that need water and power.
So true. Okay, let's bring this all together. We've covered a massive amount of ground today. PJM rewriting utility rules, Ukraine's survival grid, the bond market crowding out borrowers, these quiet battles over lithium and water. If I'm a listener trying to make sense of the world right now, what is the synthesis? What's the big picture?
The world right now is defined by the physical cost of digital ambition. That's the headline. We are seeing AI and conflict force a physical rewiring of our cities, our grids, and our financial markets.
So that era of thinking we could optimize everything with code.
That era is over. We're back to hardware constraints,
Right.
water, copper, heating, and capital.
It's a return to reality, a very expensive, very heavy reality.
It is. And it means that the speed of software is going to slow down to the speed of construction. You can't deploy a new AI model if you have to wait 3 years to build the substation to power it.
So what should we be watching next? Where is the next shoe going to drop?
Keep a close eye on the city OS. Specifically, look for more clashes between local city governments and global tech giants. We saw it in West Des Moines with the water, but that is just the beginning.
Why there?
Because local governments are the guardians of the physical realm, the roads, the water pipes, the zoning. Global tech giants are the masters of the digital realm. These two forces are about to collide violently.
So it's not just big tech versus the federal government in some abstract antitrust way.
No,
It's big tech versus my city council over who gets the water.
precisely. And in that fight, the city council has more power than you think. They hold the permits.
That is a really helpful lens. Well, we are just about out of time, but I want to leave you with a thought to chew on over the weekend. We've talked about how data centers are redesigning our power grids, our financial markets, and even our water laws. It forces a question. Are we designing our cities for people? Or are we redesigning them to be life support systems for processors?
It raises an important question about who the city is actually for.
Indeed, it does. Think about that next time you see a new data center going up in your neighborhood. That's it for today's deep dive. We'll be back on Monday to unpack more of the world's hidden plumbing. Thanks for listening.